This podcast is part of the Deluxe Edition Network. To find other great shows on the network, head over to deluxeeditionnetwork.com. That's deluxeeditionnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Drink O'Clock Podcast, where interesting people from all walks of life sit down for a drink and a conversation. Each week, Drink O'Clock features a diverse range of guests who share their stories, expertise, and insights. Hosted by Rob Max AVV Valencias. This podcast is the perfect way to unwind and hear from some amazing people over a refreshing beverage. So, sit back, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the conversation on Drink O'Clock.
You know, I got to tell you, I really love interviewing authors. So I'm happy you reached out to me. This is the Drink O'Clock Podcast. My name is Rob Valencias. I have the pleasure of having Christina Hoag with me. And Christina, you're the author of I Am the Famous Carlos the Jackal, the world's first celebrity terrorist. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It was great to hear that you love having authors. We authors love to hear that.
I interviewed a guy that had a really cool book about psychology, and then, it snowballed, and I kind of started to interview more and more authors, and I'm fascinated by what gets you so into the topic, and we'll get into it, but it's everyone has their own creative juice. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like there's not one person that's like, yeah, I just sit down and write. Like, everyone has their own little, like, intricacies when they're writing their stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody's, I'm a morning writer, some people are night writers, my brain is fresher in the morning, so more things come to me, and then I kind of peter out by noon. I'm kind of 11:30, 12 o'clock at noon. I'm done, and then I do different other things, and of course I write for I do PR writing, which actually makes me money. Not that that's another thing about authors. You have to be really dedicated to your craft because you're not going to get rich off it, but. Yeah, there's all kinds of different ways that people write and find ideas and have ideas and that kind of thing.
Well, cheers, by the way. What you got over there? You got a white wine?
I've got a Sauvignon Blanc. I think it's a Chilean Sauvignon Blanc today. That's my go-to drink.
Oh, okay, all right.
What's whiskey? Yeah, is that Scotch whiskey?
It's rye.
Oh, okay.
So it's just bullet bourbon, and it's rye. It goes really well with. So this is an old fashioned. So it goes. I feel like the rye just tastes better in old fashions. But I'm still new to the thing. I'm still opening up the horizons. I'm cracking into the whiskey thing. Not an IPA guy. I know there's a lot out there in the Cali world where everyone's obsessed with. Have you ever had an IPA? I feel like it tastes like drinking plant water.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of IPA either, to be honest. Yeah. I mean, everybody, there's a whole whiskey world out there, whiskey connoisseurs and Scotch connoisseurs and that kind of thing. So it is a big thing. But
I got to open up to Scotch a little bit. Mm-hmm. I'll get there. I'm trying to open the palate, and I always tell people I was always kind of a best word for this, a bitch when it comes to drinking real hard stuff. So, but I got this syrup that I use, and it's easy. I pour it in, and it makes great old fashions. But so let's get into this, man. So Carlos the Jackal, and we're gonna get into all that, but that was, I guess, his alias. That wasn't even his real name. Right. I was listening to a lot of your books, so. Who was a Venezuelan-born terrorist. So he did a lot of attacks in the 70s and 80s. He was kind of ruthless. But before we get into your book, I always like to take a peek behind the curtain. So, talk to me a little bit about growing up. If you don't have to go into a vast amounts of detail if you don't want to, but where are you from? Did you grow up in Venezuela, or did life just kind of take you there? Because you know how life is, and talk a little bit about Venezuela.
I lived in Venezuela. I grew up actually kind of around the world. This is one thing that I weirdly find an affinity with Carlos the Jackal, whose real name is Ilyich Ramirez, because he also grew up in many countries, moving around countries. But I was born in New Zealand, grew up in many countries. My father was in mining, so we lived in Nigeria, Fiji, Sweden, England, back in New Zealand, Australia, and then I came to the United States, to New Jersey, when I was a teenager. And later I got into journalism, and that was my thing, because I love to write. And I eventually I went abroad, to do journalism as a foreign correspondent sort of thing, as a freelance correspondent. And I first went to Spain, then I went to Guatemala, and then to Venezuela. And I was 7 years in Venezuela, and it was a fascinating time. It was really the best time of my career. And that's where I sort of stumbled upon the story of Carlos the Jackal, because he is from Venezuela, where he is, funnily enough, not badly viewed. He's actually kind of a folk hero, kind of an anti-hero kind of figure there. People don't necessarily see him as this ruthless terrorist murderer. He's kind of just, he's a famous, really infamous Venezuelan, which, not that many Venezuelans are famous. So he's not that badly viewed. And what happened is that he came up in the news when I was there because the president at the time, Hugo Chavez, wrote to him in prison in France, expressing, and he signed it, "Yours in solidarity, Hugo Chavez." And what president would write a letter to a, convicted terrorist serving 3 life terms in a French prison? So this made a big news. And his family, Carlos's family, Ilyic's family, the Ramirez's, saw this might be their chance to get the Venezuelan government involved, to get Carlos's sentence transferred to Venezuela so they could be near him. And of course the French were just having none of that. So that didn't go very far. But that's how he, sort of came up in the news when I was living in Caracas. And then I, interviewed his younger brother, who served as sort of the family spokesman, and some other people who knew him back in the day and that kind of thing. So that's how I sort of became interested in the story. And of course, I did remember him from the 1975, I was just a kid at the time, OPEC siege in Vienna, Austria. I'd heard the name, through growing up and whatnot. And so it was kind of a thrill to me to come.
And that was 75,
right? 75. So it was kind of a thrill to sort of cover something and whatnot that was that I had read about in the news. So that was it. And so I had amassed a great deal of research about the Jackal and Ilyich Ramirez and his life. And finally, I looked at it and I said, you know what? I have a huge pile, like 3 inches thick of newspaper clippings and printouts and a number of biographies that had been written a long time ago. So I kind of just put it together, and I had a lot of fun writing it. I really did.
So what's life like in Venezuela? And you were there were you there in the 80s, 90s, 2000s?
And the 90s, from 95 to 2002. And back then it was a very nice place to live. It really was. I mean, it was very laid back. There were a lot of foreigners there. They had great restaurants. It was a very nice lifestyle. The weather is sort of temperate all year round. And then it sort of went, obviously it's gone downhill now as a socialist government has sort of taken over and become very oppressive to journalists, to any dissenters. There's no political freedoms or anything there now. But when I was there...
Yeah, they have a lot of unrest and stuff.
Yeah,
there, right?
Yeah. I mean, millions of people are leaving, which, accounts for, some of the border problem that we're having in the United States. But yeah, it was a lovely place to live. It really was. And I know a lot of people, foreigners, liked living there. They lived there for years, and most of them have gone now, along with millions of Venezuelans. It's become very, the economy has crashed, and things like that. But
yeah, I Puerto Rico is on my bucket list because I'm technically half Puerto Rican. My dad was adopted, and I had tons of relatives that lived in Puerto Rico, and I didn't find this out until I'm 37. I didn't find this out until probably my late teens, early 20s. So I didn't really even know. I knew my dad was adopted, but I didn't know that like my family like was still around in Puerto Rico. So it's on the bucket list to maybe go down there one of these days and try to find people that were related to my dad to see, just I don't know, just how connected
exactly.
I have family down there.
Yeah.
Try to do those like DNA things, and I connected with people that I didn't think that I would have any relationship with, and they're like first or second cousins.
Wow.
But it's kind of wild, and it's I heard it's really beautiful down there, so it's on the bucket list.
Yeah, you should definitely check it out. I mean, there in Venezuela and Puerto Rico, it's rum is the drink, so you get some real rum connoisseurs of fine rums.
My main drink is like my daily drink if I'm gonna just have a couple is Captain Morgan. So I like my spiced rum. We vacation in Punta Cana. We didn't go last year, but we've pretty much gone. We go in the winter,
nice.
So we typically go in like December.
Yeah.
And it's weird when it's the week before Christmas and you're on the beach. It kind of messes with you a little bit. But damn, is it awesome?
Yeah, it's nice.
It is
Dominica
great.
is nice.
I hate cold weather.
Yeah.
Hate it.
It's a lovely and Venezuela had a lot of that vibe because it's all it's on the Caribbean coast of South America, so it's all it's got that Caribbean Latin kind of vibe that some of the islands have as well.
Yeah, I mean the island life it's got to be pretty wild, but it's also kind of scary. I feel like I've been to a couple places. I went to Haiti as a young kid, and it's the poverty. I mean, you can tell. I mean, it's the same thing. Like even in Punta Cana, the poverty's there. I try to tip like everybody when I'm there because the dollar goes a long way there compared to here.
Oh, it means
so if you're tipping people,
a couple dollars down there, they can feed their families for that goes for meals, for them. So it really means a lot. But
yeah, I mean, so if you're listening to this and you're going to Venezuela, you're going to Punta Cana, you're going to please tip people. I bring
small bills.
I think I bring $300 or $400 just to tip.
Yeah, exactly. Just to bring
tip.
small bills, give them $1 or something. I mean, as I said, it really goes a long way for them. Really.
I mean, I the guys I tend to tip the highest are the people that bring like the sodas and the beers. So they're the second. You got to pay the people who are cleaning the room decent. But those guys also I'll give them the first day. I give them $20, and they give me whatever I want for a week. So it's like I get all the beer and soda I want. They'll roll their card up, knock on my door. I'm like, what do you want? But you got to feel for that, and you understand the economy, and obviously there you can't even drink the damn water. I think we get a little spoiled here, but my fiance, not this past trip that we went, so this was about a year and a half ago, we were drinking mixed drinks instead of beer, and we didn't realize, we forgot to tell them don't put ice in her drink, and 2 or 3 drinks in, I'm like, oh shit, she's drinking the ice, pour it out. And it was too late, but maybe like 8 hours later, she was in bed for probably 36 hours. Like we were there for 7 days, a day and a half, she was just dead. Because it'll fuck you up. It really
flattens you.
There's a lot of...
No, I've had that. I had in Guatemala, I had bad water and got parasites, amoebas, and it's the sickest I have ever been in my life. I could not even stand up. I mean, it was so bad. It really is. Yeah, that was really, really bad. It can really...
Have you ever tried the... I don't know the last time you traveled, but there's a specific thing that you mix in water. It's like 2 drops. I don't know if you saw it on
like
TikTok.
iodine or something. You can put
and-
iodine in water and it'll purify it.
And it'll actually it purges all of your all the parasites in your body, and like you get them, like you could see them like popping through your skin, like
Oh, wow.
it's like freakish. I did it. I didn't see anything. I typically will do it after a trip internationally. So like if we go to Punta Cana, when I get back, it's like a 10-day cleanse of drinking that in the morning, and I didn't see anything. I was really worried because it mainly comes out one end of your body, so that's not one thing you just get. It freaks you out, I'm not looking, I'm not looking, but I know some people that did it and they were like, dude, it freaked me out.
Wow. No, I haven't heard of that.
I'll have to
Yeah, I'll have to look that up.
I'll have to get you the name of the
Yeah, I'll have
product.
to look that up. Wow.
It's freakish.
Yeah.
But it helps when you're traveling. So, let's talk a little bit about like what got you into writing. I know you kind of became and can you explain to my listeners what I had to Google it because I heard it, but I didn't really know what it was. What a foreign correspondent, what that is, and what you do.
Foreign correspondent is simply a reporter who works outside their home country and reports back to the home country kind of thing. So that's a foreign correspondent. So the New York Times has them. Actually it's a sort of a dying breed because so many newspapers and TV networks have shrunk their budgets and whatnot because of declining readership and listenership and whatnot. So sort of a declining breed, but they would have a bureau in Moscow and London and Paris and Tel Aviv, what have you, and those were the foreign correspondents. So I was actually like a freelance correspondent, like you could also say a stringer, and I worked for a bunch of different places. I wrote for the New York Times, the Financial Times, Time Magazine, Business Week, Miami Herald, Houston Chronicle. Basically, whoever would pay me, a bunch of trade magazines like Shipping and Advertising.
No allegiance.
Yes, So I got to do a lot of, really cool stories, and I traveled all over South America, the Caribbean, Central America as well, to do stories. And, as I said, it was just fabulous. Every day was an adventure. You didn't know what was going to come up because, a lot of these countries are very unstable as far as the political situation. The economies are unstable, very high poverty rates. So there's just a lot of stories that you do over there that just don't come up here. That you just don't see. So it was just fascinating to me, and I loved it. So I was doing that for a total of 9 or 10 years.
Hey, at least you got some warm places.
Yes.
And not like
I didn't.
Russia.
No, I went
Greenland,
south.
Alaska.
I went south, but I've been into writing.
Could have been way worse.
Yeah,
there, right?
I mean, I won a prize when I was like 5 or 6 years old for writing interesting stories. I still have this little card, like a little certificate that says, for writing interesting stories. So I guess that writing thing I was just born with. It just came out very early, and that's all, just what I love to do. And then in high school, I discovered journalism with the high school newspaper, and I said, I can write, and I liked it. And because I had grown up traveling so much, my dream was to be a foreign correspondent. That's what I wanted to do. I said, maybe I could travel with this. And that's what I ended up doing.
I love traveling.
I do.
I really do.
I'm a travel junkie.
If I could, I would I would travel everywhere. I love just culture. I will say this. I think one of my favorite classes in high school was creative writing. I actually I feel like for me, I have a very overactive imagination. I've always had one, and I feel like I could write for days. Like I think I told this story maybe the first time I was interviewing an author, but I was talking about one of my teachers, and I mean, I'm 37. I never forgot the class, and I was writing so much in those. Remember those old school, not the black white books bound notebooks, but I think it was like it was almost like the tan ones that were like flimsy with the and I filled the whole thing front to back, like I was just writing, and it was a story about a mummy. And I don't even know how I got that story, but I couldn't finish it. because I wrote through the notebook, and my teacher kept asking me, she's like, when are you going to finish it? I actually want to finish the story you're writing. And yeah, needless to say, I probably got an A in that class. But, I've always thought if I ever came into some money or I was set, I probably would like to write a book, it's something made up, obviously, but I just feel like my overactive imagination, and I could go for days just writing things in a notebook. So I can only imagine what. I'm also. I want to think I'm organized. Like you should see my Dropbox folder and how I organize stuff at work. But I don't know how good I would be at organizing my thoughts. Like that's got to be something that's a little rough. Especially if your ideas are popping in your head as you're writing, right?
Yeah, I mean, you do have to organize. I mean, one thing, you do need a good imagination to write fiction, especially, but you do need to organize your thoughts, especially like if you're writing nonfiction. It has to be very organized, like in journalism, or if you're writing a nonfiction book, because it's all going to go structurally there, so it's got to be organized. So yeah, sometimes it can be difficult to sort of, you got to meld, you got to work things so that it all fits, like sort of like a jigsaw puzzle, your plot, your characters, and everything.
Yeah, and you got to reel people in. I think here's my problem, and maybe it's an American problem. I got to be pretty captivated quickly with a book. I do a lot of audiobooks, so I'm happy. You let me check your book out, and it was an audio book version, because I do a lot of listening on my way home, and that was pretty cool. Did you have like a production company do that? Was that somebody that you just kind of reached out to read the book? How did you get the audiobook version done?
Yeah, I actually started out as an audio project. That's what I wanted it to do, because I just thought it would be a good audio book. And I had the perfect narrator who had done one of my other novels, Skin of Tattoos, which is about a gang, LA gang novel. And so I knew he would be really good at doing it. He can do accents and things. So I reached out to him. So that's it started as that. And then in order to get the book onto Audible, you have to have, which is owned by Amazon, you have to have an ebook on Amazon. So I had to make a little ebook as well. But really, my main focus was to make it like sort of like a podcast. I'm fascinated by these narrative stories on podcasts, and I think that's really effective. I love listening to them, so that's how I wanted to write the book, the Carlos story, is sort of a narrative, podcasty way. So he did the narration, and
he did good. He did good. I liked how he read it, and I probably have 7 or 8 chapters left. To finish. I'll definitely finish it. I 5-starred you, so made sure you got a good review for me. But let's get into Carlos, right? So we'll start this by like just the beginning. It seemed like he was kind of a good kid that turned bad almost, right? He was kind of getting picked on because he was a chubby kid, and Can you kind of talk a little bit about what transpired from the kid years of getting ridiculed to where he was kind of growing into that role of being a terrorist? Because it seems like he had good intentions, and I think a lot of people that do bad things sometimes have good intentions or their own version of good intentions, but it's bad. I mean, obviously he was killing people, and he was doing some fucked up stuff.
Yeah, what the driving force that I think really for him, because you're right, he wasn't a natural rebel or an outlaw or anything growing up, and his parents were sort of he had a very upper middle class background. His father was a lawyer and did real estate deals on the side, and so he came from a very sort of a distinguished background and everything, but he wanted his father's approval. And I think, and he said at some point in one interview I read, if my father had been a different person, my life would have been totally different. And I think that is so true, because he was the eldest son, of 3 sons, and his father was a totally devout communist. And he was also older when, by the time Ilyich was born in the late 40s, or he was born in the early 50s.
He's a Marxist,
yeah, he was
right?
a very Marxist and purist, this sort of purist of communism. And so he was really into this, and he would sort of instill these principles of Marxism in his kids, and he wanted them. Finally, he sent them out of Venezuela to live in London, where they would get, a worldly education, and then finally on to Lumumba University in Moscow to have a Marxist education. And Carlos Ilyich / didn't do very well there. It was just too strict because, again, he ran up then against the communist regime, which is pretty much antithetical to the Venezuelan lifestyle of rum and parties and, having a good time. And so he didn't do too well there. He ended up getting kicked out for being drunk all the time and having, he was a womanizer, and the women loved him because he was this exotic.
Just kicking women. What is he threw like a woman out the window in like 6 feet of snow.
Because he was getting raided by the police, the campus police were coming on to check on his activities. And so he quickly had this, I think it was a prostitute in his room. So he quickly threw her out the window into the snowbank. Because that was against the rules, and drinking was against the rules, and that's he and his brother, spent the time kind of just hanging out, having a good time. But so he got expelled, and his brother, Lenin, who was called Lenin, but by that time he had been introduced to this whole Palestinian. There were Palestinian students at this university, Lumumba. And so he picked up that cause, and it seemed to him, again, it wasn't violence for violence sake in his mind, it was violence for political, to free the oppressed peoples of the world. And so he embarked on this sort of journey of terror, basically terrorism, of violence to gain political ends. But I think, but again, if it weren't for his father, his mother was not like that. But if it weren't for his father, and he wanted his father's approval, that he thought his father would, approve of this lifestyle because he was, fighting for the oppressed peoples.
He was fighting, right? I feel like it's wild.
Yeah.
I was going to be a psychologist. That's what that's where I met my fiance. We met in psychology class. I'm fascinated by the human brain and what all goes into how people live their lives and make these decisions and justify things that aren't necessarily, I guess, the gray area, right? It's always in between what's right and wrong, and they always spin this really interesting web of lies and things they tell themselves to make it seem like they're okay.
Justifications,
in what they're doing, What do you think, how do figures like him and people and these are obviously going to be bigger names, right? So like a Bin Laden, Stalin, a Hitler, even serial killers like Dahmer and Gacy. What do you think compels them to spin these web stories to themselves that they're doing the good things, right? Obviously, Dahmer and Gacy are a little bit different, but Dahmer almost justified it by saying, "Oh, well, I'm taking people off the streets," or I'm not. It's not people that are justified to live. Obviously, Bin Laden, Stalin, Hitler, they all had different ideologies, but a lot of it was they were like, "Oh, well, we're doing good things," and obviously they're not. So, what do you think brings someone this, like a Carlos the Jackal?
Well, they justify it,
come up with the ideology.
Yeah, they justify it. They know they're doing something bad, something evil. I mean, how can you not know it? It's drummed in, right from wrong is drummed in for you from the time you're probably about 4 or 5, 3 maybe, you even realize what's good and bad, telling the truth and telling a lie. So they know it's bad. So they have to justify it to themselves. In the case of sort of serial killers, they really have to spin a macabre tale to justify, randomly killing people because they're, quote unquote bad people or don't deserve to live or some other, bullshit kind of, thing that they appoint themselves God, that that they're doing the rest of society a favor. It's the only way they can live with themselves, and that's what I think. It's they have to live with themselves, and even a sociopath has to invent some kind of excuse or justification for taking other people's lives. And in the case of the political sociopaths like Ilyich Ramirez or whoever else, it's political. These people, I'm doing this for a greater good. The ends justify the means. This is going to be a greater good. Yes, Carlos would say this is, yes, some people are going to get killed, but it's because, we're fighting for the freedom of millions. So what do a few lives matter?
Hey, this is Casey Shearer.
And this is Ray.
Do you like pop culture?
We're pretty sure you do.
Then come on over and check us out at deluxeedition.show.
You will not be sorry. Or maybe you will be. I don't know.
It's wild to think that he kind of fit in and did that I guess for me, and I don't know if you kind of ran into this, why did he have such an affiliation or whatever for Palestinians? Is there Palestinians in Venezuela, or is it just kind of like he made friends with Palestinians when he was in, in Moscow, and it just kind of, I guess, sung to his or pulled his heartstrings, so to say.
Yeah, I think that was it. There's no obvious connection to him, and that's been a big question about his life is why did he take up, Venezuelan of all people, take up the cause of the Palestinians, quote unquote liberation. Yeah, I think he just ran into them at Lumumba University in Moscow, and he'd hang out with them, and he was very drawn to their story of being, thrown out of their homes by the Israelis after World War II, and he, and they were starting this whole ramping up this guerrilla movements, which of course were a big thing in the late 60s, early 70s anyway, on many different fronts, and he decided that was what he was going to join. Even though there was a guerrilla movement back in his home country, Venezuela, there was a guerrilla movement, and there was certainly guerrillas in Colombia, many other places in South America. But I think he wanted the world stage, and the Palestinians had that world stage, and they were doing big things, hijacking planes in the 70s, and bombings, and there was the 6-day war, and all these things were going on. And I think that bigger stage lured him, attracted him, rather than the smaller stages of these smaller revolutions or guerrilla movements in South America. So he, became
and it's weird to think too. His name too. It kind of threw me for a loop because he's got a very Russian name.
Well, that was his father named him Ilyich. He named his second son Lenin, and the third son Vladimir. That's how much of a Marxist he was. He named him after his idol was Vladimir Lenin, so he named him, Ilyich Lenin Vladimir. He named these, ultra Russian names. Having
the last name Ramirez, it throws you for a loop.
Exactly. Well, that was again. That was
I thought that was
of his father. That was how much of a Marxist he was.
I thought that was kind of funny, and he did. So we hit on kind of what he was a good kid that kind of got into doing the exact opposite of what his dad, because his dad said he didn't want violence, right? So he's like, but the ends justify the means, and I'm going to do violence. So talk a little bit about. All right, so he he was a kid. He was ridiculed. He goes to college in London. Not for him. He's with his brother at that time too, right? They both go to London. Then they both go to Moscow, and his brother kind of is his lookout, right? He's kind of like he's like, hey, you got to tell me people are coming, whatever the case is. And his brother's like, dude, I'm not doing that for you all the time, man. Like, they're not going to like that, whatever. And then he ends up getting his brother and other people kicked out. And so he goes from there to, I guess his dad comes to, that's when he joins with the Palestinians. He sits in that guy's office for a while, and he refuses to leave. And the guy's like, this kid doesn't even look like somebody that could be, what was it? Not a terrorist, but
a fighter.
He didn't think he had the look, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
A fighter for he goes off after he gets kicked out. He decides there are actually training camps in Jordan for foreigners who want to join the Palestinian cause. I mean, he wasn't the only foreigner who wanted to join in to fight for the Palestinians. So there were actually these training camps. So he heads off to Beirut to join the cause, and he shows up. He has a name, and it was Bassam Abu Sharif, and he shows up at the guy's office and says, "I want to join your cause." And of course, Bassam Abu Sharif is like, "Who is this guy?" And he's there in a suit and all very formal. But something about him, he just didn't give up, and something about him said, "Okay, we'll give you a shot." So he sent him off to the training camp, and that's where in Jordan, and that's where Ilyich really excelled. He was a very good marksman. His shooting skills, he really took to it, and unlike his studies at Lumumba, and so they were impressed by him. So finally, the Palestinians, and so they, sort of took him on. And the other thing he had going for him is that he was European. I mean, he looked European, and the Palestinians needed people in Europe, operatives. And they said, okay, we need people who can also speak various languages. He could speak English, French, not French so much then, but English and Spanish, some Russian. So they sent him back to London to be their operative, and because he could blend in with the population, and so that was also an advantage for them.
I thought it was funny when you were going through it, and they're like, and here's a new passport. You're going to be going by Carlos, and it's like that probably made more sense than his real name.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Which was kind of funny. Yeah. I was laughing when they said
we have to give you a nom de guerre. And, how about Carlos? That means, there was Khalid, translates from Khalid in Arabic. And so he's like, okay, great. So he became Carlos, yeah. That's when he became Carlos. But yes, exactly. It was more typical of a name than his real name of Ilyich.
Yeah. Like, I feel like if I saw that, I would be more, like Carlos Ramirez would be more believable than Ilyasovich Ramirez. It's like I don't know. It's funny, but in terms of Carlos the Jackal, the terrorist, what do you think are some common characteristics? I don't know if you've covered anybody else or if you had interest in other people that kind of were along the same lines from a terrorist perspective or like him. What do you think are some common characteristics of people like him that kind of either put him in the situation he's in, or have it so that he's, I guess maybe they're more susceptible to be the people that would break the rules and do something like him?
I think that you have to be really almost like a tunnel vision, that, again, you're so almost brainwashed into these radical movements, because he fell into this, it was a time in the early 70s, there were tons of radical movements in these groups all over Europe. Even Japan had a radical group. And so there were a lot of these cells and groups going around, and I think you almost had to be brainwashed. And I think it was also attracted people who were searching for something, looking for a place that they'd felt out of place with something, so they needed something to latch onto, and this provided them something to, gave them meaning and purpose, a cause to serve. And it didn't really matter what they had to do. And I think it was a camaraderie. They were doing these underground all these kind of things. They were taking seizures and they were fairly serious things. Seizures, taking hostages at embassies and things like this. I mean, it was big time stuff, and smuggling weapons, putting bombs on trains, all these kind of things. But I think they just got really wrapped up into this. They were part of this political cause.
This group,
yeah.
I feel like it's got to be a lot of it, right? It's like you finally you're with like-minded people,
right,
and you're all pushing for the same thing, I guess. Now I don't want to talk too much more into your audiobook because I want people to listen to it. So I don't want to cover all of it because then they'll listen to the pod and they won't buy the book, and we definitely want them to check your audiobook out. But why? So he wasn't caught until, like, what was it, the mid-90s? Like 92, 93 or something like that?
Yeah, he was finally caught
94.
in 94. Yeah, he'd been out of touch. He'd sort of gone into sort of forced retirement, basically, because all those groups, after he sort of got, he did the big OPEC siege in Vienna, and so that really put him on the world stage, and that was Carlos the Jackal. Then he became Carlos the Jackal. And but he wasn't, after that, he wasn't too accepted in the Palestinian group anymore because he had actually violated a lot of their rules of the Palestinian, what was it, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. So he became like a rogue mercenary group, and he became like a mercenary for hire, terrorist for hire, basically, behind the Iron Curtain in East Germany and Hungary. But eventually that all kind of petered out because that radical groups by the 80s had sort of, they were all in prison and basically run their course. People had, not lost patience with them. And a lot of them were dead also. They got killed. So he kind of went underground, but, he was wanted everywhere. So he ended up finally in Sudan. And finally it was the CIA who found out who he was and where he was, and they alerted the French because it was the French. He had killed three policemen in Paris in a big attack, and so they were really hot to get the Jackal. Whereas the United States, he'd never operated in the United States, so there was no arrest warrant for him. The Americans had no real cause to catch him, but so they passed on the intel to the French, and they came up with this elaborate scheme to kind of trick him into basically kidnapping him from Khartoum in Sudan and whisk him back to Paris and put him on trial. And that's where he is, and he's serving 3 life sentences in solitary confinement in France.
So why the Jackal?
Yeah, that was kind of a weird thing. I mean, what happened? He had all these girlfriends, and he would use their places, their apartments and things as stashes, and he would leave weapons and things. So he had left this bag of weapons in an apartment, a flat in London, and the girl that he had been seeing now had a new boyfriend. And the boyfriend he came in one day, and it was a really hot day, and there was some weird odor in the apartment, and he sort of traced the odor to the bag that Carlos had left, that they knew that this guy, Carlos, and he opened it and he found weapons, and the thing that was giving off the odor was actually an explosive that apparently sweats in high heat, and it gave off this, I guess, a chemical odor. So he ends up calling, he doesn't know what to do, he ends up calling a reporter at the Guardian newspaper in London, and they come over and to check out the stash, and and they see that he had the paperback by Frederick Forsyth called The Day of the Jackal. So the reporter's like, oh, that's it, Carlos the Jackal. And that's how he got that silly name. I mean, he became known as Carlos the Jackal.
That's funny. You gotta love how some of these guys get their name. I mean, I feel like, it makes them sound pretty badass.
Yeah,
I'll give it that. I mean, it's definitely like a good frontline newspaper article.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, it definitely has a ring to it,
So, oh yeah. So why do you think it took so long for them to get him? Do you think he was just obviously it's the mid-90s. It's not like now where they find a hair and they can pinpoint everywhere you are for the past month. Do you think it just technology, the lack of that, it was just harder to find people?
Yeah, it's a
then,
good question. I mean, for a long time, he had the protection of governments who were actually afraid of him because they didn't want him to start bombing, their places in their cities in East Germany or Hungary. So he had all these governments kind of just putting up with him, tolerating him and appeasing him for a long time until finally they could no longer do that. And so he had to go then to the Middle East. And again, it was the same thing, as long as he would keep a discreet, presence. But the thing was, he was quite an alcoholic. He was a partier. He was a womanizer. He never kept a discreet existence. So that's why he couldn't really sustain it in the long term. But he made it for a long time. He lived underground and for whatever reason. But I think the main one was that he had the protection of these governments.
Is he still alive?
He's still alive. He's still in prison. He's 75 or so, something like that. He's in his 70s. He's still alive. He's in a prison. They keep him under very strict confinement, solitary confinement. He's only allowed to see his lawyer and a doctor, and I think a priest or something like that. He's not allowed general visitors. He's allowed a radio and
newspapers. Wow. I mean, he's 75. Like how much damage is he doing at this point? Yeah. But I get it. I mean, you got someone. I'm sure he's got connections that. He's still unrepentant. He's never expressed any remorse in any courtroom or anything. He maintains that he's still a revolutionary. That it was a revolution he was trying to foment. So that hasn't endeared him to the. So he's a narcissist.
Yeah. I mean, I think and I think that I tried to make that clear too. He's a very narcissistic individual. Just he was very vain, for example, about his appearance and that kind of thing. So he is a narcissist.
It's funny. So in terms of what all went in? I know you talked about like how much you amassed, but what all went into the research you did? Like how long did it take you to research and then put everything together to actually write it?
Yeah, it didn't take, when I finally just did this, I had everything and I knew the story basically, but I had to go back over it and whatnot. It didn't take long. It took a few months. And now we have the internet, with the internet you can find out everything too, so many things. What the challenge was in writing a story is there were many conflicting pieces of information. So one thing would say he did this between 1972 and 1974, and then I'd find another source that say he did this at this time. And so I had to kind of either see what was most believable or what would be the most logical and what I could corroborate. I tried to corroborate everything that I could find. Cross-checking. I had to do a lot of cross-checking. So I really went down the rabbit hole.
You interviewed his brother?
Yes, I interviewed his brother, Vladimir, the younger brother.
How was that?
That was fine. He said, I don't know a lot about my brother's life. To me, he's Ilyich. And we've never really asked him about his life and the details and the things he did. Probably because he doesn't really want to know, maybe, But he was very formal, very open, but I don't think he knew that much, or he didn't want to say too much about his brother. His and the family's big thing that he was illegally abducted out of Sudan, and that he should have, it was a violation of his human rights, basically, that he was taken by the French back to France. But he doesn't get a lot of sympathy.
And what about his middle brother, the one that was kind of like with him?
Yeah, Lenin. He was very close to Lenin. And he doesn't really seek the public eye, I think. I think he was just too close to Ilyich. And the younger brother he was like 5-6 years younger, so he's got a little more distance. So he's taken up more the family as the family spokesman.
Wow, interesting. So let's talk about the future. Do you have anything going on now that you're willing to talk about? Do you have any follow-up books or any new research subjects you're working on?
Well, I'm working on a mystery novel. and which actually has a
Ooh,
podcast.
okay. Tell me more.
Which actually has a podcaster in it. It's one of the sleuths is a true crime podcaster. So I'm working on that.
Yeah. I've checked out a couple things on there a little recently. So my podcast you can find anywhere you listen to podcasts. So it's Drink O'Clock Pod on most socials. I am part of the Deluxe Edition Network. It's a podcast networking group that's awesome. I got to talk about the podcast of the month. It's Friends Talking Nerdy and Films and Fermentation. So it's just kind of like a group of like-minded people. We talk about do's and don'ts and how to get better. We promote each other. It's a really great network that I'm a part of. And look, it was a pleasure having you on. And look, if you ever need anybody to do any free voice work, you let me know.
I will.
Okay? I'm always happy to help. You let me know.
Yeah, that's good to know. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
Yeah. Well, look, hopefully you finish your wine and look, have a great night. And it's a little later here for me. You get to enjoy the sunset at this point over in LA.
Right. Well, right now it's pretty gray and gloomy out there with the rain, but yeah.
I'm not used to it raining over there. I gotta.
It's amazing. We can go like
I'm sure
months
people are
in the
freaking
summer.
out.
It's months without rain. I mean, we can go 2, 3, 4 months. I mean, no rain. I mean, it's incredible. It really is.
It's funny. We just had snow. I think it was 2 weeks ago, and Philadelphia. I know it's hard to believe, but we went over 2 years. It was like over 300 days of no days with over an inch of snow. And then we had 2 days we had 2 days in the same week of over 2 inches. So it was like a Tuesday we had 3 inches of snow, and then Friday we had like 8 inches of snow. It was
all or nothing.
It was wild.
Yeah.
I hate it. I would much rather just see a bunch of rain and then not have to deal with it. But I mean, I guess it comes with the territory. Maybe one of these days I'll live in Florida and I won't have to deal with it. LA's a little pricey for me.
It is, yeah.
So,
Florida's much more affordable. It is.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, I might stick with Florida or Arizona. Somewhere with maybe that doesn't have a state income tax. But look, it was an awesome having you on, and I hope in your future endeavors you kill it. And I will follow all your stuff. I promise.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, look, you have a great night, and thanks for hopping on.
Thanks for listening to the Drink O'Clock Podcast, where fascinating people from all over the world share their stories over a drink. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform to catch up on past episodes and stay up to date on new releases. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for future guests, the team at Drink O'Clock would love to hear from you. You can find them on most social media at Drink O'Clock Pod. Until next time, stay classy and remember, people, it's always happy hour somewhere. Cheers.